Okay, for our last activity, I have one more thing where we're talking about plants and how they grow. So this plant is a daffodil, and you might remember me talking about a daffodil outside the other day when I talked about the flower and the roots and the stem and the leaves. But in this activity, we're going to be sequencing, which is a big word for putting things in order of how they start and what comes next and what comes after that, and then finally the last stage or the last thing. So before we do this together, let's do an example. I'm going to angle this down like I always do. And look at this. This is a pumpkin plant. So we know from our book that we read earlier today that these plants start out as little seeds. So I'm going to put this first because we know this is how it starts. And let's look at the pictures we have left here. And what do you think happens next? If it starts out like a little seed, does it become a pumpkin next? Or does it start to grow green leaves? Or does it start out with flower? Or does it next have flowers? It next starts to grow up and show the stem with some leaves. So we're going to put that second. This is first, this is second. And then we've got two pictures left. We're going to look at which one comes next after that. Do you think it's the pumpkin or do you think it's the flower? Now this is a little tricky because we haven't learned about pumpkins specifically, but I will tell you that the flower comes first and then the big pumpkin, the big fruit comes next. So now we have what happens first, what happens second, what happens third, and what happens fourth and last. So we're going to try that same thing, but with a daffodil. Now a daffodil doesn't start out as a tiny seed. It's like a seed, but it's called a bulb. And so I'm going to give you the first one. This is how it starts out. And this is called a bulb, a flower bulb. And they're usually sort of a tannish color. I'm going to make mine brown. And you can do the same. And then let's see, this looks like, what do you think this part at the bottom is? These are the roots. Now they're very, very thin, so they'll be tricky to color. But if you want, you can even color all the soil here brown, including the roots. But the stem that comes up into the air out of the roots, that's going to be what color? Do you remember from the daffodil we saw outside? It's green. And I know this is teeny, teeny, tiny and will be very tricky to color, but you can try your best. And over here, this is the whole plant with the roots and the leaves and the stem and the flower at the top. So remember, the stem is green. What color are the leaves? Those are green too. I'm going to color those green. And the roots and the soil are brown. And the flower of a daffodil is yellow. Sometimes they can be white sort of on the inside, or sometimes they'll have yellow flower petals and the inside looks orange. There's a few different types of daffodils, but I'm going to do a regular yellow daffodil. And then here's another picture of the roots and just a tiny little sprout. So I'm going to make that sprout green, but the rest, the roots and the soil, we're going to make brown. Make sure you pause the video so you can take your time coloring. And when you're done, we're going to get our scissors out. So I have mine ready to go. I've got my thumb facing the sun. And what I want you to do first is cut along this line all the way across to cut the plant off at the bottom. So you're going to have this part. I'm going to place that there. And now I'm going to cut all the way across that long line. I want you to do the same because it will make it easier for you. And we can get rid of our schnibbly bit. We don't need that. And then we're going to cut down each of these lines. So we have 4 squares with the different pictures on. Okay. Now comes the part we have to use our noggins and make sure we think about. Do you remember which is the first thing to happen when you're growing a daffodil plant? It's like a seed. It's this one here. And for this plant, it's called a bulb. So we're going to place that in the number 1 spot. I want you to get a glue stick. And you can put some glue on this side and stick that down. What I sometimes like to do is place them in the right spot first and then glue them down so we can make sure we've got it in the right spot. Okay, let's look at what pictures we have left. Now, if it starts out like a bulb, what do you think would happen next? Would it all of a sudden be a huge flower? Would it be a long stem? Or would it just be a tiny little sprout? If you said tiny little sprout, you're right. So put some glue on the back of that, and that's going to be the next thing that happens. First a bulb, then a tiny little sprout coming up out of the ground. What will happen next? Will it be a long stem, or will it be a stem with leaves and flowers? I think it would be a long stem. So you can place that in the 3rd spot. And that means at the end, it's going to be a beautiful flower, just like in our story with the seed. So now that we have these in the right spot, you can get your glue stick and paste them on, and you're all set for the day. Bye, everybody.